Ik heb een spender. Nou, laat ik gaan. Zo nog aan.
As good as we'll ever be.
Okay. All right, you all ready?
There we go. The TVs are still on.
All right. Let's start today with any announcements from Alexa that you want to start with at all, or do we want to?
By our bylaws, we have the committee can sign for reappointment every few years. So we've got some forms we're gonna hand out. Just if you're interested in continuing the committee, sign them up. I can issue you a return envelope if you don't want to do it today. You want to send it in later. Maybe say a week or two to send those back in, and then anyone who's not in here tonight will get one as well. So I'll pass these out.
All right. I don't think you have a choice.
How are you, Alexa?
I could do an announcement. First of all, I apologize. She should never let me touch the TV. I'm not allowed to, I've been banned from the remote control in my house, so she should never let me touch it. I'm sorry for that. We had a surge in the building the other day, and I think it blew some of the switcher boxes, so, but we got through it. Just to let you know, if you haven't heard already, one of my deputy chiefs, Adam Kenyon, has been promoted to Chief of Shellfish Management, and I think he went over there, it's been a while now, but we finally filled that position, and I'm very glad to say that Joe Grist, which may be a name some of you remember.
Oh my goodness.
He worked here for a number of years. He was deputy chief for a few years. Then he went to work for the City of Newport News, and he was with Department of Environmental Quality for a number of years. And we're glad that he's able, he's decided to come back home in a sense, and he will be starting tomorrow. So we're glad to finally, and we're proud to say we had 5 vacancies in the last 4 months, and we're proud to say we finally got them all filled, including an artificial reef coordinator, which we haven't had since 2017. So our staff is back up to capacity of what we had before, so we're pretty pleased about that. And look forward to seeing Joe here, and he'll be in these meetings. And Joe was in the thick of things when we were going through some of these issues in the mid 2000s. So you see a lot of his name on some of the old documents. So I'm sure he's going to be a great asset to the agency. So, all right, that's all I got.
Congratulations on getting him back.
Hmm?
Congratulations on getting him back. All right. Anything else to start off with, Alexa? Any other news? All right, so we'll look at the minutes from last meeting, August 30th of 2022. You'll take a second and look at them if you haven't, and we'll entertain a motion when you're ready.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to approve the minutes as submitted unless there's any corrections.
Sounds good. You got a second in the what?
Second.
All right, Mr. Patterson, all right. All in favor?
Aye.
New business, review of the Chesapeake Bay Winter Crab Dredge Survey.
All right, let's get into
That's
the meat of
you.
things. So, brief summary of the 2023 abundance results. All abundance estimates increased from 2022, which is good news. Most abundances are higher than the results in 2021 and 2022. However, they were all low, all or just about all lower than the period from 2015 to 2020. Total crab abundance increased 42% to 323 million, which was an increase from the lowest year on record, which was 2022. 2023 now ranks 22nd out of the 34 years of the survey. Juvenile abundance increased 15% to 116 million crabs. It ranks 6th lowest, so the last 3 years have remained pretty low. Adult female abundance increased 56% to 152 million crabs, which is above the threshold. So, we're not overfishing them, or they're not overfished, but still below the target where we want to be, which would be 196 million crabs. And then the adult male abundance just about doubled to 55 million crabs. So here's total abundance. You can see it is higher than 2021 and 2022. That's 323 million, which is below the average, the long-term average of 410 million crabs. The adult abundance, so age 1 plus, was 206 million crabs, which is above both the long-term average of 183 million and the average since 2009, which would have been 204 million crabs. We've got adult abundance by sex. Pink is female, blue is male. You can see those both went up last year, or this year. Adult female abundance, here it is against our biological reference points. So we're at 152 million crabs, above that threshold of 72 million, but below that target of 196 million. So unfortunately, we haven't been above that target since, it's like 2017. So we'd like a few good years above that. So these results have managers and scientists a little uneasy. We expect variation. We don't manage to single year abundances. We like to see trends, or don't like to see trends as the case may be. And the trend is for 4 years we've been below average, and the last 3 years of juvenile abundance have been in the 6th lowest of the survey. So one metric we're kind of using to look at this is recruits per spawner, which divides the number of juveniles in a year by the number of mature females in the preceding year. In other words, each mature female present in the bay during each winter survey spawns in the spring and summer and contributes on average this many of the juveniles we see present in the following survey. As you can see by the red dotted trend line, the spawning stock productivity is less now than it used to be. There's a couple different things that could cause this, environmental factors, predation, changing stock dynamics. So in September of last year, the Chesapeake Bay Stock Assessment Committee hosted, here at VMRC, a workshop to discuss possible factors. A few were mentioned, no smoking gun identified yet, but that workshop was a good kickoff to the upcoming stock assessment we'll be talking about a little bit later. Moving into harvest, this is our bay-wide commercial harvest from Chesapeake Bay. So this does exclude the seaside areas. Altogether, harvest increased 3%, while harvest increased in Maryland and Potomac River, it decreased in Virginia. That's 42 million pounds of crabs there. Biggest change in harvest came from the female crabs. Usually Virginia catches the lion's share, but 2022 was the closest we've seen to an even split between Virginia and Maryland. We've asked to see distribution maps of crabs throughout the bay from the dredge survey. We're hoping that might explain if there's distribution changes we're seeing in just where they are overwintering, or if there's a harvest pattern that's affecting this outcome. So we're hoping to get that in some amount of time. On the other hand, male harvest distribution has remained fairly consistent along the time period. Another biological reference point we managed to here, female exploitation rate, or the percentage of females present in the bay during the survey that were removed by the following year's fishery. So as you can see, we've remained below the threshold, which means we've not been overfishing since the 2008 management regime change. We had been remaining below the target as well, which is where we want to be due to uncertainty in harvest estimates, especially in recreational harvest. But 2022 makes for the second year in a row where the bay jurisdictions exceeded the target. So definitely a number we want to keep our eye on, although we're not too concerned since we are still below that threshold. Preliminary data also show we've now exceeded the male conservation trigger for the second year in a row. Since we manage the female population, we don't have the biological reference points for males that we do for females. However, Chesapeake Bay Stock Assessment Committee, CBSAC, chose what was the second highest harvest on record as a conservation trigger to alert managers that something is happening while not necessarily calling for action. So that triggers at 34%, and we harvested 39% of the males last year. Due to age and growth in the blue crab fishery, juveniles present in the winter dredge survey will be the basis of the next year's fishery. An interesting way to see that is here. Juvenile abundance is plotted with bay-wide harvest. You can see the two track together pretty well. When juvenile abundance improves, so does harvest. So that's another thing we want to keep our eye on in light of those low juvenile abundances. We'll be happy to take any questions. You've got me and Pat here, and we also have Ram and Mike Sebo from the Winter Dredge Survey, and Vim's here. So any questions, let us know.
I have one.
Mm-hmm.
You said that the harvest increased. Did the amount of crabbers increase from one year to the next?
I
Were
don't
there less
have-
crabbers one year, more the next? I mean, common sense to tell you if you've got more people crabbing, then your harvest is going to increase if you got less.
I don't have that bay-wide. I know in Virginia the number of crabbers decreased and the number of trips decreased as well, but I don't have any effort data from Maryland or the Potomac River. That's not something CBSAC puts together for these reports.
So you're saying the number of crabbers decreased,
In Virginia.
but the harvest increased?
Harvest for Virginia decreased. That's something we're gonna get into.
The harvest decreased and the amount of crabbers decreased.
Yes. Bay-wide harvest increased just a little, just 3%, not a lot. So I don't know how effort changed in Potomac River or Maryland. So I don't know if overall the number of crabbers increased. But in Virginia, effort decreased and harvest decreased.
Well, common sense would kind of tell you the more people crabbing, the more crabs you can catch, the less people crabbing, the less.
Mm.
I'd like to know the numbers on that, if there's a way to tell how many crabbers are crabbing. If there's a way. But you understand what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
Did you had a trip slide at some point, didn't you? Number of trips taken this year?
For Virginia.
For Virginia, yeah.
Yeah, so we're gonna get into Virginia-specific harvest. I figured we'd let any survey abundance questions, and then we can get into Virginia trends, which I think everyone in here won't be too surprised by.
Alexa,
Question, yeah.
a question. In the survey, it said adult males nearly doubled. I guess that's male crabs over 5 inches, is that correct?
Yeah, that's adult males.
Why don't they put a number on the males?
Because since one male can fertilize multiple females, it's really the spawning stock of females we kind of look to indicate how many juveniles we should see the next year. questions come up about sperm limitation in the fishery. Is that what's holding back? There's not been a real good answer one way or the other yet.
I come up with a number of 55 million, does that sound close?
Yeah.
Yeah, just by using the juveniles and the females, the numbers for those, and total abundance. 116 million juveniles, 152 females, 55 males gives you 323 total abundance, so that's the number there.
Yep, yeah, it's, I think I got the number, yeah, 55 million adult males, 152
I
adult
just wondered
females.
why it wasn't a number put on the males.
But we do have the number of males. We don't have a reference point for them. We don't, we've got the exploitation, the conservation trigger for exploitation, how hard are we fishing the males? But since it's the female spawning stock that really drives the next year, that's what we really use as our indicator.
Okay, cool.
Yes, go ahead.
I mean, if we're going over getting into the caution range, but our population is doubling, it almost like that trigger's not even close to right.
Just the male population doubled.
Well, isn't that what you said, that we were only, was it same thing, males, that we were overfishing them by like 3% or something?
We're not overfishing them. We don't have a metric for how hard. We don't have something that says we are overfishing males. We just have what we call a conservation trigger, which we said, let's pick what had been the second highest harvest or second highest exploitation and say, if we fish more than that, something's changed, let's be aware. But it's not like females where if we went into that red zone, we said we have to take action. It's just something to be aware of. So adult males doubled, but the total population isn't in a great place yet, which is driven by the low amount of juveniles. Since they kind of dwarf, everything else, if they don't increase by much, we're not gonna see a huge increase in the overall abundance. In the scheme of things, the males, the number, they make up a smaller portion of the population than adult females. So it's not, and doubling of the males won't immediately mean a huge explosion in the total population.
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Thanks for the presentation, Lex. So one question being that Ram is here and Mike, at least through the grapevine, we've kind of heard about there were maybe patches of crabs that were found during the winter dredge survey that were kind of different than what we'd seen. And I know you said you were going to get the density maps, but I don't know if Ram or Mike might comment on areas where they at least saw differences from previous years in the survey where crabs were.
Mike, do you want to? Typically, we found crabs where we normally find crabs. We did find larger areas just north of Wolf Trap that don't always hold them. And a lot of times that just depends on how fast the water gets cold as to how far south they get down. But typically, yeah, where we thought we'd find crabs, we did find crabs. And I do have a couple of density things if Ron wants to, I can give them to him or give them to you all, where crabs were off this year.
So we asked Glenn Davis of Maryland DNR said he was going to put together some distribution maps because seeing the difference in where female crabs are being harvested, that it increased in Maryland, decreased in Virginia, we're kind of wondering, is that an artifact of distribution? Or if that's ruled out, might it be something with harvest patterns?
All right. Any other questions? All right. Good.
Okay, we'll move into Virginia's 2022 harvest then. We had a decrease of 15% from 2021 to 16,082,500 pounds. The usual distributions, 97% from hard crab pots, about 3% from peeler pots, and 0.2, 0.3 from all other gears. The dockside value decreased 24% to almost $29 million. That's from the voluntary buyer reports, so it's not something we regularly collect. It's voluntary, whoever decides to return the survey. And I'll point out that, as you're all aware, 2021 saw the good prices despite harvest decreasing. So unfortunately, we didn't see those last year. Harvesters decreased. I believe 2021 was just about 800. We went down to 738. And trips also decreased to about 19%, decreased 19% to 46,000.
Excuse me, say that one more time. I think I just asked that question. Repeat what you just said.
Virginia's trips decreased 19% to 46,000.
Okay.
So we don't have Maryland or Potomac's number of trips, so I can't say Bay-wide what effort was, just for Virginia.
Lex, question,
Question.
kind of along those lines with Marshall. How many harvesters participated last year versus 2 years ago?
It was 795 in 2021
Okay.
and 738 in 2022. So you can see harvest was below average, below both the long-term average since 1994 when we first started the mandatory harvest reporting, and since the 2008 management regime change. It's the lowest harvest we've seen since then. And you can see here how effort decreased with it. Effort being the yellow line there. So one thing we look at is effort distribution, so how many people are taking how many trips. So on the left is 2021, on the right is 2022. Each of those columns represents 25 trips. So how many people fished 0 to 25 trips, 25 to 50, 50 to 75. So what we see is that more crabbers fished fewer days. So fewer crabbers fished over 50 trips, and more crabbers fished 0 to 25, 25 to 50 trips. And what we really think drove that decrease in harvest, it was last spring. So last spring, you know, I had so many people coming and saying the crabs didn't show up. You know, come April, people were saying they or people they know weren't putting their pots out because it wasn't worth the work for what they were going to be getting back. So in April and, you know, March is usually variable, so I kind of didn't count that. But April and May, it was 50% lower harvest than in the preceding 5 years. That yellow-orange line represents the average from 2017 to 2021. So usually you see that spike in April and then again in late summer, but last spring, harvest was about 50% lower. Harvest increased in the fall, but you can see it was still below average. And we heard that from Potomac River Fisheries Commission in Maryland as well, that, you know, their springs were much, much lower than expected, or than they usually get. So just some quick numbers on hard crab pot licensing. You know, we still had about the same number eligible, about the same number of licenses sold, fewer active. You can see from 2021, 65% of eligible licenses were worked. In 2022, only 61% of eligible crabbers were active in the fishery. Peeler pot as well went down from 34% of eligible to 30%. So on May 18th, these results, the winter dredge survey results were reviewed by CMAC. Yesterday, I presented all these results to the commission. Today, they're being presented to the advisory committee. June 27th, that will be the commission meeting for any 2023, 2024 management measures, which at the very least will be resetting bushel limits as we do every year. And then we do have upcoming a stock assessment. So as you'll recall, last year was the lowest crab abundance in the 34 years of the survey. This bird increased demands for a new benchmark assessment because the last one was over 10 years ago in 2011. A new stock assessment can incorporate new data, new modeling, and will inform the biological reference points, those thresholds and targets that we use. Chesapeake Bay jurisdiction has been working with CMAC to procure funding for a new stock assessment. We think we have that in hand. It's expected a data workshop to assess what data is available and whether it's appropriate to use it will take place later this year, probably sometime in the fall. And then we hope to have a completed stock assessment for 2025. And we'll see where that takes us. So any questions?
Questions? Any questions from the audience?
Yes, ma'am. Your female harvest distribution, you don't think anything of that has to do with the lower limits that were put on us all fall from October on?
Could be. We don't have, that was October, November, we had that
Correct.
lower amount. But I think a lot of it's going to be that the females we didn't see in the spring. Because that was where we really saw the difference in harvest.
And your trip data, your decrease, do you think that could also be to your lower limits and low market value for what they were last fall, coupled with the lower limits versus a high oyster market last fall? Do you think that has anything to do with, your numbers being closer to what Maryland is instead of us being higher in the females like we have been in the past?
It definitely
Because
could be.
we took a hit last spring, but so did Maryland as well, so I feel like that should even out, but for the fall, maybe not quite so much, especially with them not starting allowing oystering until November 1st.
Again, I don't know how Maryland's effort changed. I know ours decreased, could be due to low value, especially compared to the year before, could be low bushel limits. And again, in spring, I know all those people who said they just weren't putting their pots out because it wasn't worth it.
Your female exploitation rate, that's been below the threshold in your target 14 years in a row until the last 2 years, and it was off by 1% and 3%. Well, in what you presented in Figure 5, it states that it's prudent to remain slightly below this target given uncertainty associated with these estimates. And I know you mentioned harvest. Do you also think that 1 to 3%, that all it was that was over it, could have been done because the survey might have been off on the population a little bit? Because we're 1 to 3%. I mean, that's almost negligible when it was 14 years in a row that it was well under the target.
There's two numbers that go into it, abundance and harvest. We don't right now have an idea of which number or the both in concert. I mean, last year we did see females decrease to, I think it was 97 million, which was pretty low for females, especially in recent
It's
times.
still nowhere near the threshold.
Right.
Correct. Also, going back to 2011, there was a joint study by VIMS and the Smithsonian Environmental Research Center saying that the juvenile numbers may not be completely accurate because the winter dredge survey is a deep water survey, and nothing has been done to change how we judge our juvenile numbers. Because in my opinion, the juvenile stocks were at record lows for 2021 and 2022, and then this year was a little better, but yet our adults doubled. How does that happen when you don't have the small grades 3 years in a row and the males doubled and the females went up by 56%?
Ron, do you want to talk about?
Sure. There are a couple of things that actually could lead to that, but also that concern me in terms of the juvenile numbers. And so you're correct that we did this study about the juveniles, and what we found was that we're missing about 80% of the juveniles that are in very, very shallow water. Our vessel cannot go shallower than about 6 feet. And so that's why we conducted the study in that year, and what we had hoped is that we would get enough funding to actually measure or survey the very you in the stock assessment assumed that we're missing 60%.
Is that 60% calculated into that number, or is that number that's shown there strictly what was?
The 60% is calculated into the abundance estimates and so on. The problem that I see in that, and that's why we wanted to get an additional survey to be able to do that, shallow water survey, is because that percent, you can almost bet it changes from year to year.
Right.
It's gonna change based on the water temperatures, you know, how fast they grow and so on. And so far, we just haven't had any funding. We're trying to use some of the other surveys to see if we can correct for that, like our fall surveys, to do that smaller juveniles.
Well, for that,
But, so anyways, but that changes from year to year. That could explain those low values. Was there a higher percentage of young juveniles? What I'm concerned about is what, in effect, what I just saw here today from Maryland. One explanation for why we're not seeing those juveniles, even though females have bounced back up, is that a smaller fraction of those females get to spawn. And what was really concerning to me is that Maryland's female harvest has increased over the last 5 years. None of those females have ever reproduced. Females don't reproduce until they get to the lower bay in Virginia. So anything that's caught in Maryland is on its way to reproduce, and so anything that's caught there has not reproduced. So if they're catching even more of those females, then that is really concerning. I hadn't seen that particular slide yet. And Alex Schneider, who's there, she's a doctoral student, she's been looking at reproduction, fecundity, and so on. And she saw in the Virginia data that females, that pattern I think that you showed is probably driven by males, I would think, unless we didn't have that year's data. But Alex, if you could mention what you saw in terms of the female harvest in Virginia?
In the proportion of, you mean the proportion of females being harvested by
proportions,
season?
yeah.
That we've seen an increase in the proportion of females harvested in spring since the closure of the winter dredge fishery in 2008, which is concerning given that the majority of those females in spring have not yet reproduced as well.
And she's also conducted a 3-year study where she was able to use a marker for females, whether or not they spawn. Turns out that about 90% of the females that are spawning are doing so for the first time. So we rely on that new cohort of recently matured females, matured and mated females for the spawning time. And so what we're measuring in the winter dredge survey is the potential spawning side. We got the females that are there in winter, but then some large fraction of those, or some fraction of those is being harvested before they get to the spawning century. And the thing, like I said, that really concerns me is besides the fact that our spring fishery has increased, obviously after the winter dredge fishery closed, and what happened, we didn't simply lose that effort was displaced to the spring pot fishery. So we've got two different elements that are hitting the females before they ever get a chance to reproduce.
But we're still managing a fishery off of a survey that I even heard yesterday we know is flawed. So, I mean, there's obviously more juveniles out there than what is being picked up by a survey.
Right, so that's not a problem in terms of if we get some accurate percent that we're missing, we factor that in. Right, so we do factor that in, and it's factored into the assessment and to the reference points. The problem that we have is whether that fraction changes from year to year. So we call it a bias. There's a bias. As long as that bias remains consistent and we have a good estimate of it, it's not a problem. The problem does come in when it changes from year to year and we don't have the means to determine how much it's changing. So that's an issue. And we're aware of that, and so that's why some of the reference points are actually more conservative mature females that have just matured that year, 90% for spawn and recruitment. And a large fraction of those that we say are here are actually getting caught before they ever spawn. So that's my main concern. And so one solution to that is to allow them to spawn and then catch them after they spawn. That would be a really, so that hopefully that would be a win-win situation where we're simply reallocating the catch during the year. And so,
Your exploitation rate, does that include Maryland as well through that the survey? It
Yes.
includes everything. So you're telling me that they're harvesting more, but for 14 years in a row, in the past two, it was 1% and 3% over the over your target number, still nowhere near your threshold, that they're the ones that are causing the problem. And also, I'd like to see, can you show me the harvest again, year by year for females? Is that increased a whole lot, like the total Baywide harvest? So I don't see where the total harvest has increased enough for you to tell me that Maryland's catching more than what, I don't agree with that, with what I see there. And the exploitation rate, with that being well below your targeted threshold, I don't see where you saying they being taken from the population before has anywhere it needs to be, there's a disturbing trigger there.
well, that's the total harvest during the year, the exploitation rate, but it includes the females that have and have not spawned yet.
I understand.
And so it's seasonal, it's really the seasonality of the catch that I think is important to have a strong spawning style.
Mr. Sandberg, you got a question?
About the landings and the Maryland actually increasing in their female landings. Is it possible that the Marylanders are catching them in Virginia and just putting them in their truck and going right to Maryland and reporting as Maryland crabs? I mean, that could possibly be a part of what you see there. So, what you're saying about spawning that.
And they'd be catching them.
They're catching them in Virginia,
In the
is what I'm
spring,
getting
right.
at, in the spring of the year. Put them in their truck, take them to Maryland, because they get a higher price in Maryland, is what they're doing. So, that could be a lot to what we're seeing here.
I will say that this is something that we think is one of the main issues that we need to deal with in this upcoming stock assessment, to figure out whether there's some kind of a relationship between what we see in females there and spawning stock abundance, which we do measure with 2 of our surveys, trawl surveys. So we're gonna try to see how those match up, whether they do hold or not.
Mr. Moore?
Ron, question for you about that 90% number you were discussing. Are you, being that surprising to you, are we thinking that crabs are not sponging out as much after that first time as they used to, or?
This is, basically, if you look historically, all the way back to the Van Engel days and so on, typically the percent that survive the spawn a second season or year is gonna be between 5 and 10% approximately. Alex has been looking at that historically. So there hasn't been a huge change, so what we have to rely on is the numbers of those first year spawners.
Okay, so when you say first year spawners, it's not the first time the first year, it's the whole.
No, they're actually first time spawners,
Okay,
yeah.
but they may spawn multiple times that first year.
Ron, I think one thing that's going on, and I know it happens, a lot of the females aren't getting fertilized. I'm gonna say, I've done a couple surveys myself, and 15 to 20% of the females were never fertilized. So that's part of the equation now.
I will say that the previous studies that have been done on this, looking at that, have been basically conflicting. Some show that virtually no females don't have enough sperm to fertilize the eggs, and then others say that there is a reduction, and that's one of the other things that we're gonna look at. Just so everybody's aware, a ratio of about 3-to-1 up to 5-to-1 females to males is what allows all the females to be fertilized, somewhere in that ballpark. So, meaning every male, the male after it mates, it can recharge in about 2 weeks to 4 weeks. So they can be mating several times in the season.
Mr. Nixon, you have something?
About this subject that Mark brought up. Those harvest numbers on females coming out of Maryland, is that what's reported in Maryland?
Yes.
Now, if you got an out-of-state license crabbing in Virginia, they still have to report Virginia harvest no matter where they sell it?
If it's coming out of Virginia, it should get reported to
should.
Virginia.
It should be.
Should be.
Yeah, it should be, right? They ain't doing it. How accurate do you think that is?
I don't know if we have a way to tell.
Yeah, I think you'd have to have some kind of, lots of law enforcement presence there to, follow them leaving the state and not reporting it,
But-
yeah.
Mr. Powers, but it used to be at least that enforcement would report to the reporting people, I saw Joe Smith on the water crabbing today. And then the reporting people would look at the reports and say, Joe Smith crabbed today and didn't report landings.
We could do that,
So there is a way they can check, and you could target and enforcement can just make it a point to at least report this vessel or whoever. Gentlemen in the audience there.
Back to your female harvester, Maryland, alarming you. You said it's increased. Your graph right there shows something different. From 2019 to 2021 was a steady decline, and then it picked up just a little bit this past year. I don't agree with what you were saying with that.
You see that Maryland's in red now.
Yes. The female harvest declined from 2019, 2020 to 2021. It picked up for 1 year, and that's, I mean, for 1 year, we make an assumption off of it.
So our concern with 2022 was that Maryland's share of the females increased. That's the line graphs you're seeing there.
Our lower limits and our lower decrease in licensed people working, you went 735 to 738 compared to 795, and what was it, 19% less in trips, plus the lower limits for last fall. That, to me, that right there is a no-brainer. That makes up for a portion of it, if not all of it.
Mhm.
Sure does.
And that's not, you didn't state anything about either of those when you were comparing the Maryland to Virginia. And I understand it's right there in red and blue, but there are more factors into why our numbers were down than what I think was reported.
There's definitely a lot of factors going into it. We don't have a hand on all of them, but, we know differences in management, changes in fisheries. Their fishery looks a lot different than ours. And it's, sometimes it's like comparing apples to oranges. We can't just compare a one-to-one, but we know these are all going into it.
Mr. Headley, did you have something? You had your hand?
No, sir.
Okay. Ron?
So what I was saying is that the average from 18 to 22 in Maryland has been higher than the average before that. Remember, the regulations went into effect, and it would have affected the female harvest around 2009, 2010, when we had the severe management action, so that the female harvest went down. And now all of a sudden it's gone back up to the years before those severe management actions. That's what I'm concerned about. And especially because none of those females have reproduced. None of them.
Was there another question in the back there?
Yes, you're touching all on what I'm asking, I guess, but, as somebody that studies this, does the surveys, what is the most alarming, concerning factor out of this report? Which slide are we looking at? Female harvest, Baywide, juvenile recruitment, what is the single
Well,
most?
I'll give you both sides of that. One thing that makes me feel better is the fact that the spawning stock has increased. And because our female spawning there's not as much of an effort to say, hey, population's collapsing. No, I know we've seen that kind of decline before, and the population has recovered from that. What's getting a little troubling is what's happening with those 3 years of consistently low recruitment. And that's what, the main thing that concerns me. Remember, we had low recruitment the year before, we got that spike up in females. So there's something going on there that makes me feel optimistic, but still we want to get a better handle of those little
Right.
juveniles. That's the only thing that really concerns me.
If we think back to last year, when we were sitting right here and everybody's freaking out, cutting our limits, what were you looking at exactly to cause that rise, and how does it relate to this year's findings?
Well,
Reduction of females.
I'll
There's a
just
reduction
say
of
what I-
females. as
But
well.
now we've increased 56% just in the last year, right?
Right.
So we shouldn't have to deal with those, some of those limits, maybe, you know? We should be able to revisit it, right?
Yeah, the
And
only
that's-
thing that I'd like the commission to consider, this committee, is some sort of reallocation of catch, not necessarily reduction, just reallocation so more of those females get a chance to spawn. And that would be for Maryland, too.
How do you see that happening? I mean, because in fall, they're all, impregnated, right? So,
Yeah, well. in the
They're
winter-
going down in the
winter,
fall and then all
the
spring
females-
long?
Yes, all the
And then
females
sponge
that
crab.
we catch are mature females that are pregnant. Yeah.
Right, so half our crabbing season, we are targeting, females that are spawning stock, right?
Right.
So it's not an easy thing to do, I guess.
Yeah, that's why in fall and spring, we wanted to ease up on the females to make sure the fertilized females could safely come down the bay. And then in spring, to make sure more were able to spawn before being caught by the fishery.
Right, but now we've got that 56 increase, right?
We're, we definitely like seeing that increase in the females. We just are concerned that, we are, a little uneasy about the fact we're not seeing it get turned into the juveniles yet.
But we're still surveying in places where they're probably not necessarily at. We're not surveying changes in the weather and in the environment and, global warming and all that. I mean, they gotta be in other locations. If you got adults, you had juveniles somewhere.
Yes,
Well,
that's
that's
what
why-
we're doing. We're trying to see if we can figure out if some of these environmental factors like water temperature at a certain time is accounting for those drops or increases in juveniles, so that we could factor that into the event of the stock assessment.
Well, that's why we try not to manage to single-year numbers. We try to manage the trends. So the first year we saw recruitment that low, we said, we'd like that a little higher, but we're not gonna do anything just yet. This could be a fluke of the weather or, whatever environmental conditions were going on that year. But having seen the continued pattern is what had us taking action last year.
All right. Any more questions from, yes, sir?
Wasn't there a juvenile trawl survey done in the early years of this survey or not?
We did, it was very limited, but just for young, but we do have the regular juvenile trawl survey's been ongoing for decades. And so we're trying to look at that and see.
Is it going on now?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so we're trying to see if we can match things up from that survey. The DRESS survey has been really consistent, at least in Virginia, since the early 90s.
Okay, so ever since the start of the dredge survey, it's been consistent,
We're
everything has
pretty
been
comfortable, I think.
absolutely the same, no changes
After the first
whatsoever.
year, 93, 92, 93, everything remains really consistent.
Okay, then all the stations you go to, same time of year, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You don't change the dates and times that you go to those
We start
stations.
roughly around the same time in December. I mean, it used to be when you had a commercial fishery, we would do November before all the dredgers got out there and started getting into the crab. It kind of skewed things.
Okay.
You
But
won't
don't you think that would skew things now because you actually changed from November to December?
We used to have colder water temperatures in November, and now it really doesn't get cold. We might get a little cold snap. We had a cold snap this past November, and then it warmed up in December.
Right.
And then it didn't really chill down until about the first, second week of January, really.
Well,
So we have a lot of faith in our, the way we run the survey.
yeah, but I mean, you know, your
You know,
data,
You can't really catch crabs that well when the water's warm. I mean, they're.
you cannot.
Huh?
So they're crawling. So it's a possibility this winter they were crawling all winter and your data could possibly be wrong.
We really didn't start till after it was below 10 degrees, and I'm not saying 10 degrees makes a crab not be able to move, because it doesn't. But once it gets down to about 5 degrees, they're really not gonna get out of the way of your dredge.
And tell the audience how many different sets you make. It's a significant number.
750 stations in Virginia. and
We've
then
got a-
Maryland does 750.
Yeah, we've got that on a picture right up there, map.
That's annual effort that they do between December and March, with 1,500 sites.
And you do have information on the densities in the bay from the last survey that you'll share? Can you share it now? Or,
Well, that's what's up there.
no, I mean, more specific of where the crabs were. I mean, I think somebody was asking about disbursement.
Mike can show you, yeah. I mean, Mike's got those figures, so.
Mr. Headley, you have something?
Yes, you say that you're really worried about the juvenile population. How come the only juvenile targeted fishery that we have isn't taking reductions the same way that the hard crab fishery is taking reductions?
Well, the commission acted on trying to limit the harvest on the juveniles that were entering the fishery in the fall a couple of years ago. Remember, we were targeting the fall fishery. But I just want to say, I'm not overly concerned yet about the juveniles. I'm just beginning to get concerned because they've been low for 3 years. So because the spawning stock's still high, and I'm optimistic about the total population because of that.
Well, how do we have 3 years of low abundance in juveniles and we have a 56% spike in female population?
Right, that's why I'm
It's
saying that
gonna-
I'm not overly concerned about the juveniles, because we have seen that, exactly.
Well, what I'm saying is, the survey says they're not there, the juveniles, but it also says that the adult crabs are way more than the juveniles are supposed to produce. As far as, we have low abundance of juveniles, but we had a 56% spike in female abundance this year from last year. Where did the adult crabs come from? If the survey says they're not, I mean, juveniles are gonna turn to adults. We know that. If the survey says they're not there, where'd they come from?
Well, that's what I'm saying, we may be missing a fraction of those juveniles that are in shallow waters, and it may be that in the last 3 years, we were missing a higher percentage than we think we are. Yes, as I said, the stock assessment assumes we're missing 60%. But we know full well that the 1 year when we conducted the study, we were missing about 80%.
So where did 60% come from? Why is it 60 and not 80?
The stock assessment in general, they agree, what they do a lot of statistical analyses, and they try to figure out how they can match up all the different data, the harvest data, the abundance data, all that, and have it all basically be, or match well. And to do that, they assume that 60%, to do that, you have to assume that about 60% of the juveniles over the long-term record. And so that 80%, for instance, that we found that 1 year may have been a much higher percentage than we normally do.
But it could have been a much lower percentage too.
Well, it could have been. What I'm saying, though, that it's possible that that percentage was much higher over the last 3 years. And that's why we're seeing low juvenile numbers. It may just be that the juveniles are in shallow waters. And so that number may be inaccurate a little more than it normally is. I totally agree. I mean, I'm in favor of having the shallow water survey. We just can't get the funding to do it.
You say you would like to see a reallocation in different spring to the fall. So we're gonna reallocate air catch, but let Maryland keep catching them.
No, I would say the same thing for Maryland.
Well, we have seen in the past that Maryland does not
They need
go
to-
along with the flow.
Yeah, that's up to the agencies, right?
All right,
We can make our recommendations, but then it's up to the agencies to try to figure out how to deal with that.
yeah.
That's why the spawning sanctuary, the northern boundary of the spawning sanctuary is the Virginia-Maryland line.
To the left.
They didn't wanna do that, we did, so.
Okay.
That's a really good question. I mean, I think that's something that the agency's gonna have to deal with.
Mr. Nixon?
Years ago, when this first started, David Laurier used to participate with your dredge survey. Did he ever do anything inside much?
Did you ever do anything what?
In the rivers, in shallow water?
Yeah, we went the same area.
It's the same areas. It wasn't any deep.
Well, you
I mean, it
indicated
wasn't
a
any
little while
shallow.
ago that you had done some shallow water sampling
In small
in the
boats,
past,
small boats,
Yeah.
suction tanks,
Small
things
boats.
crazy.
Yeah.
even smaller than that.
Oh, yeah, we used 20 to 23-foot vessels where we literally jump out of the boat and use a sampling gear that catches really almost all the youngest juveniles, tiny ones.
Yeah. All right, well, let's go to discussion of possible management responses. I think that's where we're.
So every year, Virginia, Maryland, and the Potomac River Fisheries Commission get together, look at the results, and decide, talk about what kind of approach we want to take for management for the upcoming year. We also hear from the Chesapeake Bay Stock Assessment Committee what recommendations the scientists have. So the CBSAC's recommendations were to continue to implement precautionary measures in light of these survey results. Virginia, Maryland, Potomac River Commission discussed keeping status quo for this year. But one thing we would like to address is bushel limits. You know, we heard a lot last year about equity in the bushel limits. So we did some rebalancing this year, and we plan to propose a new low bushel limit that takes a little less of the pressure, puts a little less of the pressure on those higher pot categories. So when the new low bushel limit kicks in, the 85 pot licensees would have 8 bushels, the 127s would have 11 bushels, 170 would have 14, 255 would get 22, and then the 425 would get 36 bushels. Would the committee like to discuss that?
I know I've heard some things about that from committee members.
That's about a 20%, 20 to 23% decrease from the high bushel limit to the low bushel limit across the board,
This is in the spring.
spring and fall.
Well, you realize that in the spring of the year, that's the time of year when the crabs are the highest. And the less bushels you decrease, the less money that people have opportunity to make. That's the time of year when everybody tries to get their investment back.
But we do
Well,
also
but
want to make
crabs
sure that
get-
the crabs have time to spawn
Crabs get
before
cheaper
they're
in the summer
harvested.
and they're high in the spring. That's, the spring and fall is the big opportunity. That's where the majority make their money at that particular time. It's, you keep reducing, we keep reducing, we keep reducing. After a while, there'll be nothing. And if, Mr. Chairman, if we lose crabbing in Chesapeake Bay, we've all had it, there's nothing else. The fish are gone, the toads are gone, oysters hadn't made a recovery, that's limited, crab dredging's gone. We gotta be careful what we do with this crab,
No doubt about it.
because that's the biggest industry, there's nothing else here. Like I said, the dredging's gone, gill net, that's down, fish trapping, everything. Toad pot, you name it, eel pot. No. I think a motion to kill that in a heartbeat.
You'd rather keep the
I've also
lower?
learned this through the years. I've learned this through the years. I've been here many years, 20 years or more, Pete Nixon and myself. I also know one thing. If we can get together with him and get together with VMRC staff and this committee, most of the time, that'll work. Most of the time, if we can all get together and agree on something, it'll work. But Ron and you and the staff, they get paid. So the commission pays more attention to the staff and Ron than they had this committee. I know, been here a long time, but I also know when we all work together, most of the time, the commission goes with that. I know that too. But most of the time, if the staff says, we want 15, and this credit committee says, we want 20, most times staff gets what they want. I know that from a long experience time. So, for the ones that haven't been on here a long period of time, I'm telling you that now, that we do need to work together, because if we don't, Ron and the staff will probably get what they want. That I know. I've seen it many, many times. I've stood at the podium many times in front of the commission and said this, and I've had the commission members, yeah, you're right. So we'll get that off the table right off the bat.
But you
So
do
you want a reduction right
It's
in the spring?
not a reduction. It's an increase.
Increase, right.
It's an increase she's proposing.
I'll go along with that.
Okay.
But we
So,
got,
but
we need
right
to get
now-
away, from reductions, because that's when the folks make the money spring and fall.
So right now, you have the lower limit, which is the second column, in the spring and the fall, and the high bushel limit in the summer. And what she's proposing is the right-hand column be the lower limit in the spring and the fall, which is an increase in every category except for the 85 pots. It's a substantial increase from
I agree.
425.
Mr. Burns?
Great.
I'm just wondering, like, what time frame y'all are looking at? Like, are we ever gonna get the full limits back, or that's just,
Mr. Gear?
how many years do you want to see improvement?
We did what we did last year as a precautionary approach. We saw we had some problems. We're not back to where we need to be. So what we're suggesting, but we realized what we did had a disproportionate effect on the larger pot licenses, and we realized that. And you brought that up. This corrects that problem. It corrects that problem. We deliberately did this to correct that problem so it's more fair. CBSAC, and we put those measures in place last year, Maryland, Potomac River Commission, and VMRC all agreed we should try to keep those precautionary approaches again this year. But we want to, which were the middle column, but we want to make those cuts proportionally correct to the different types. So there is, it's an increase in potential quota, potential harvest. So, Marshall, I don't know if you understood that, because, that's what we have. If the population returns to where we want, we will go back to that high bushel limit. We've done it in the past. We've given you longer seasons sometimes. We will do that. We're not, I keep hearing you're just gonna take. If things return to normal, we will go back to those bushel limits. We meet every single year and we make those decisions. And I would prefer, when we have those meetings with CBSAC, it's status quo, smooth sailing, and just keep on going. But the last 2 years, we haven't had that opportunity because of the lower numbers.
What's gonna be considered normal? The normal when I started is way different than what you think normal is.
That was no
No,
limit.
I will not even begin to guess what normal is, Pete, with the environmental changes we're seeing. So, normal would be, a high bushel limit. That's our standard right now.
No, I'm talking about to make you go to a higher bushel limit. What,
Would it have to be target abundance?
We're gonna see that spawning
Bushel
stock,
limits, we're in the season.
returning to a level that we feel
Worry
confident.
about the season. This is a
Well, I
joke.
think we're gonna get to that.
All this is a joke.
So, okay? I just want to clear that up. Yes, the commission will listen to us, but we listened to you
I know you do.
and made that change. We did that.
Well, I agree, that was the biggest problem I seen with it this
Yeah.
year. It wasn't even enough bushel, difference in the bushel limits to pay for the razor clams to fish your extra box. We'd be better off stopping
we realize that, and that's why we adjusted it this year. Okay?
All right, Alexa, what's next on your?
That's all we got. We just have some information on percentage of the license distribution. Just more information for that bushel limit discussion. Like the 85 pot licenses made up 4% of the harvest from 2018 to 2022, despite having 29% of the eligible licenses, 23% of the active licenses. Makes sense because it is the lowest pot category. 425 pots made up 10% of eligible licenses, 13% of active licenses, but had 38% of the harvest. So, you know, we do see rebalancing the bushel limits to definitely have an effect. And then that was our wrap-up of possible management responses. Just would be other business and public comment after that.
Any further comment from the, Mr. Powers?
On a management response, you've opened up and increased the bushel limits for the commercial fishery, but you haven't done anything for the recreational fishery. I would suggest that we add 2 weeks in September.
The recreational fishery also didn't take a
Five pot
cut.
license. What?
The recreational fishery also didn't take a cut last year like the commercial fishery did.
Recreational fishery took a cut when you said they can't fish, the 5 pot license can't fish but except between June and August.
The 5 pot was for, you know, the major recreational season for summer. You can fish 2 pots for during
We had a
the
man in
regular
here
pot
last
season.
year who was a 5 pot recreational crabber, whose point was that just when they start to pick up in the end of August, you closed it down, and historically he has done better in September, and he wanted it open further into September, and I'm proposing that you at least add 2 weeks in September to the 5 pot license.
The also other difficult thing about the recreational fishery is we don't have a handle on how much there is. The
How many
recreational
like you-
5 pot licensees are required to report, and very, very few of them do. We tried to increase,
But you know how many licenses they have,
yes,
and that number is?
usually about 800.
You know how many 12-year-olds throw a pot off their parents' dock and they go buy a license?
I agree that the majority of recreational are the people using 2 pots, which the agency can't
We
manage.
don't, we can't, it's in
Not allowed.
legislation and it's not.
Let's stick to what we can manage.
Well,
Any
and so
other-
to
any
that
other
end,
things?
I would still request that you open it up 2 extra weeks in September.
Would, I've asked about this for years too, would staff be in favor of doing away with the time in the spring that we can start? I've preached it for years, it has nothing to do with time, it has to do with water temperature. Would you take that in consideration?
You're talking
You mean the season
right?
date?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, because I've said it for years, I mean, I've told this story many times. Many years ago, I put crab pots out on February 14th and had a hell of a week. Then it snowed, you know. But for some reason, for the last few years, you want to stick to this time frame. And there are some years that it does get warm earlier than other years, and some years it stays cold longer too. So if you open it up on a certain day and it stays, you can crab that day and it stays cold for 3 weeks, it means nothing. But if you open it up, you know, if it gets warmer earlier, then you can start earlier. I mean, would you consider that? And Ron, would you?
Didn't you say the same thing about the end of the year, about when to stop it? If that's the case?
You know, we all know that we know when to start and we know when to quit, it's all based on water temperature. We try to get
Hard to manage.
we try to get a little piece first. A little piece first in the spring. Would staff consider looking into that?
We could look into season starts not for this year, or not for, you know, the coming year.
Right.
You know, I can tell you already that March's harvest this year is over twice what it was the last 2 years. And, you know, like Ram said, we want to make sure as many crabs get to spawn as we can. So, you know, I don't think we'd want to liberalize anything for the spring until we saw
It's worth
certain
action.
patterns.
Okay.
But it's definitely a concern we've heard, and, you know, something we want to keep in mind.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
I'm on the same page as him. Here's the deal. You said you saw it doubled in the month of March. The reason why it doubled is because the crabs really never buried. And then what happened was there was a glut on the market, the price went to nothing, a lot of people were cut off, and the crabbers made no money. Why do we continue to sell our crabs for nothing based on our season? You know, you're talking North Carolina of $140 the day before Virginia opened, $160 in South Carolina. And then as soon as Virginia opened up, boom, the price went right down in 5 days. We have the management tools to do something about this. Bushel limits, I mean, you've done any and everything to manage this fishery. I see where we can manage it to where we can have a year-round fishery. And yeah, it may be bushel limits, but you know what? I'd rather catch 5 bushels at $150 than 15 bushels at 10. I mean, literally, it's stupid. Why do we give our product away? Why? I don't understand. Managers need to look at that. And y'all, I mean, I'm not trying to be mean, but you turn a blind eye because you have to see a specific target that you want to see on a graph that may or may not be correct. I don't want to give away stuff.
Well, you've got a good point, and I think, you know, we obviously can't do anything for the start of season this year because it already started, but we have in the past listened to you guys and extended the season in the fall. You know, given, you know, there was a motion that came forth within the last couple of years that said, we need to get in August to decide what we're gonna do.
2020.
In 2020.
You know, if you want to see your dockside value increase, open
It's-
it up year round.
It's a little harder in the springtime because if we want to base it on temperature, you know, like somebody said, you could warm up, maybe January was really warm this year, and then got, you know, a cold spring. So it's a little more difficult in the spring. But, you know, we could definitely look at, you know, in the fall and explore that like we've done it a couple of years ago. And I agree with you. We want to try to get the most for our biggest bang for our buck in our harvest.
You've got data on who usually crabs first and who stays in late and this and that, so you know a number.
Yeah.
You know, and with a robust oyster fishery, how many people would actually crab? I would say it would be very, very few, honestly. You know, so.
Yes, sir, Mr. Nixon.
Mark and I had talked about this. I'm not taking sides in this at all. But the reason we had dates put on this originally, where they were in December and March, was when crab dredging started.
The conflict.
Pretty much waned. We don't have crab dredging anymore.
Yeah, I would say that, you know, we can look at a longer season, but I don't know if a year-round season is probably where we want to go because.
Go like
you know,
Carolina.
Yeah, there's a lot of programs out there cleaning up pots in the wintertime, and you want to, you know, almost every state has a closed season for that reason alone. But, I mean, we can look into it, you know, as Ram said, trying to protect those females in the spring. You know, unfortunately, that's when you're making the most money off of these things in the spring, but that's when they need the most protection too.
I agree there, and that's why I mentioned bushel limits.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a no-no. Don't even talk about bushel limits, because people get all bent out of shape.
Yeah.
I get it, you know, but giving away your crabs,
Yeah.
I mean, go buy a steak. I mean, I was literally selling crabs for less than a steak. I mean, that's.
And that happens in every state, you know, as soon as one other state opens just to the north, the prices drop, and that happens everywhere. And we've talked about that, and is there a way we can do, you know, it would be really hard to get all the states on board to try to stagger that appropriately, but, I mean, we could try. I mean, you know, I talked to a few people at ASMSC after I talked to you about that, and they all kind of said, yeah, it would be great, but it's probably gonna be difficult to, yeah.
So back to the discussion of possible management responses, and that is for the fall. That's correct, Alexa?
So anything we put into effect at the June commission meeting, we usually do fall 2023 and then spring 2024.
Yeah. thoughts on? I mean, do you need a motion? But, well, do we have any other thoughts on what other measures we might want to propose?
I'd like to see Crabbe go a little bit longer in the fall, but.
Make a motion.
And so when you say that, what
I
you,
mean, I'd rather have the bushels than I would have the.
okay.
To Mr. Dick's point, the fall piece, we could always come back and talk in August, right? Because we'll have reporting with electronic reporting now.
So, towards that end, I make a motion that we do come back in August, or at least staff looks into it. And if it's a possibility for opening it later in the season, that we have a meeting in August. That's a motion.
All right. Is there a second to that? Second.
I've got a question about it though. Are we talking specific dates right now as far as like opening? No, nothing like that?
No,
Okay.
we're just talking about coming back in August like we did in
Okay.
2020 and discussing it.
All in favor of that?
Real quick, if I can just
All right.
write this motion down to make sure we're all voting on
All right.
same thing. It would be motion to come back
Motion for staff.
in August.
No, motion for staff to look into the if there is a possibility that we can open in November or at the end of the season, extend the season, that the staff calls a meeting in August for us to discuss it. If staff looks at it and says, this ain't happening, then it's a waste of time to come back.
Mr. Moore, are you all right with that? All right, well,
Is this the text you like for that?
For that, where I said if this ain't happening.
To extend the fall season, is that what he's talking about?
Yeah, come back and discuss it in August.
Yeah, not to extend it, but to come back and discuss it in August, which is what we've been doing the last couple of years.
does it sound all right?
What about increasing the
bushels?
That's, I think,
Okay,
let's go with this and we'll come back.
what's that?
All right, all in favor?
This,
All right, so that's,
can you keep hands up a little longer? That's 10-4, 11-4. And all right.
I think there would be a second motion that we support the increase in bushel limit that staff proposed.
I'll second that.
For the fall picture?
Start through the fall.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll start in the fall.
Make sure that's in there.
And it continues in the spring, is that correct? Is that what you said?
It would be for this fall
Fall
and
and
then next spring.
Okay.
all right.
Would that be for November start or the earlier date?
That would be starting October 1.
October 1.
All right, now is
Is that language good with the maker of the motion?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, all in favor?
All right.
Is there a second to that?
I second
To the motion, okay.
Okay.
Mr. Cox says he has another question for you, Lex.
Rob and the fellow said that in the spring, that you want to protect the females in the spring. You want to protect them the most. Is that correct? Is that how, I think that's what he said, that's when you really want to protect the spawning stock is in spring. Is that correct?
There's a complication there.
Understand.
Yeah, that's my preference, so that they get into the sanctuary.
Well, you know, as we all know, there's a big thing going on in the country about that, but, my question would be, the sponge crab that is, fixing to have their babies, I mean, already pregnant, fixing to have their babies any day. To me, that would be something, that'd be more interested in protecting, not something that's not even ready to have a baby. We got 1 month pregnant or 9 months pregnant. You understand what I'm saying? You keep saying that you want to protect these in spring, that we really got to protect these, but But now you got females out of sponge crabs that are getting ready to have the babies.
We're already protecting them.
Oh, is that right? Well, you come around the dock in July and see how many orange sponge crabs you see. That's getting ready to have the babies.
The bushel limits are increased.
Yeah.
That time of year.
Yeah, when they're fixing to have the babies. Yeah. But in the spring, when they ain't just pregnant, we want to protect them. I mean, that's just 1 month pregnant or 9 months pregnant. Which one is the most important to you to protect?
Oh, Ron, don't you always say that, Ron, the most fecund in the spring, those put.
So, yeah, some of Alex's work shows that those females that have just matured and are about to reproduce for the first time.
Yeah.
In the spring, those are the ones that have the most eggs.
Not by a lot compared to.
By how much?
I don't have an exact number off the top of my head, but they do in general produce more eggs. The first brood is the largest for a female crab, and then the broods get smaller with each subsequent brood that's produced.
I got a question about that too. Where are the samples being taken from? Are they from the tributary or from the actual spawning sanctuary itself?
Which sample?
What, the ones that she's sampling, the females?
They're from the VIMS trawl survey, so we have 2 years worth of samples from across the.
I'm sorry.
It's from across the spawning grounds. So every station that the trawl samples that gets sponge crab.
Okay, so it's from the
Across the
winter
bay.
dredge survey area.
Yes.
Okay.
All right,
From
Alexa?
the main stem spawning grounds.
Right. Why doesn't anybody go to the tributary?
Well, they do.
The only tributaries we really catch sponge crabs in is the James River, and then the York and the Rappahannock see very few sponge crabs. So we just don't focus collections there because it's very unreliable.
So she has looked at some data from the James where they do catch some.
But this is only the sponge crab, it's not actually just a crab, is that correct? That's just sampling.
They're catching both mature females and sponge crabs.
And she can sample both to determine.
All right, Alexa, what's next?
Did the 6 go up as far as the bridge?
Is there any other business from the committee?
Any other business, committee members?
I've got business. I wasn't even thinking about this. We're gonna talk about sanctuaries real quick. Is there a possibility to open up the sanctuary off Virginia Beach to go crabbing there? Because the lower bay is the only place that we don't have a place to go into the bay. We're kind of jammed into Lynn Haven.
Not for this year, we wouldn't have time. Something to look into in the future?
Yes, sir, Mr. Nixon.
I want to go ahead and kick the hornet's nest on this one. Back in, I don't even remember when it was, the late 80s or early 90s, this committee and some commission members worked for months on how we were going to cull crabs. This was brought up actually by law enforcement back in the day because there was no regulation against culling at the dock. And a lot of guys would fill their whole boat with crabs and come in and cull them at the dock. And if somebody showed up and they had undersized crabs, they just heave them overboard or they just sell them. We worked on this for a long time and came up with a plan that allowed for 3 of these plastic totes, like a lot of people shake hands, would be allowed on the boat, crabs that were unculled. The only change at one time for that was when they came up with the black sponge law. We said you had to toss them overboard immediately. I've always abided by that. I guess I've been lucky. Sometime a few years ago, this changed, and I don't remember talking about it in front of this committee. I don't remember seeing it on a commission agenda. Maybe I just missed it. You know, I'm getting a little old. The brain cells are probably going bad, but now the regulations say that you have to call immediately And it was brought to my attention, I was talking to a guy, I was crabbing by myself one day, it was blowing so hard, I had to leave where I was crabbing and get in shelter out of the breeze to go ahead and call off. And one of the other crabbers, right, he said he just went from one line to another without calling off one day and got pulled over by an enforcement officer and told him he had to call off before he could even go from one line to the next. And he had somebody continually calling in the crabs. They just hadn't completed their call. I didn't know that. Anyway, so I started reading regulations. When did this come up? What is that supposed to accomplish? And is there any way to go back to what we had originally? I talked to Commissioner Green about it on the phone right after that. That was in the fall. He's hiding in the back now. But he recalled to me that when he was crabbing, that's what they did. Sometimes your colors can't even keep up with what you're catching. And if you gotta go to one spot to the other, you gotta sit there and wait for somebody to call off, and that's not efficient work. Yeah, we got an 8-hour time limit now. We didn't even have that back in the day. So now we've got to, as soon as you finish crabbing a particular area, you gotta stop, call off before you can go on the other side of the river. And that's the way it reads, and that's the way it's being enforced. And I'd like to see this discussed, and I'd like to see it changed if there's no particular reason. What's the reason for it? If I'm gonna toss a crab overboard on one side of the river, and I can't go to the other side of the river before I call off, that crab has two things on the back of him they call swim fins. He can go wherever he wants, as long as I return into the water. And if you don't believe they move, they don't move. I don't understand what we're accomplishing there. I don't know where it came from or how it came about. Is there any way we can get this looked into?
I don't know the history of that, but we can definitely look into it.
Take a look at it.
I'm in violation every day.
Don't say that on the record.
Yeah, hold on, you're being recorded, you know.
Well, I don't care. I'll take a ticket and take it to court. And then I'm gonna sue over it.
I guess it's
Hey,
the
Pete?
spirit of the law and the letter of the law, if he knows the difference, I guess.
Pete, maybe looking into it to a point that if it doesn't have a lid on it, then you can.
Well, we just had it
if
so that
you
it was.
cut- I remember them very well.
As long as they weren't in baskets, but you could not have any more than 3 of those plastic tubs for an equivalency of it.
But normally if you've got a lid on it, you finish it, so maybe we can go that route somewhere. But if it's got a lid on it, then that basket's cold. If it don't have a lid on it, then you haven't covered it. That might be an idea.
Well, it couldn't really even be in a bushel basket unless you're in the middle of culling it off, you hadn't finished. You know, sometimes we don't finish a basket. I don't understand what it was supposed to accomplish.
I remember when we did that a long time ago.
Yeah,
Long
it
time.
took a while too, didn't it?
Yeah.
Videos and everything
Oh,
else.
yeah.
So I would like to get an understanding on that.
We do that maybe in
And
August.
the other thing is last year in one of these meetings, I guess we only had one, the subject was brought up, and I talked to Dr. Gear about it, was
Please, don't call me Dr.
doing something about this, finding out how effective this black sponge law really is. You recall that? And we were gonna have a group get together and do something, and then, you know, in the middle of COVID and nobody working and all this stuff, it all just got lost.
Yeah.
Half of this discussion of the last meeting got lost. You know, I'm reading on the last page of it, we talked about agents, and it said, right here at the end, that, the commission would vote on agents sometime in 2022 before the 2023 season started. Never heard anything about that either.
Okay, we have, we had a lot going on in the second half of the year.
I understand it.
Okay, and that's no excuse. We have a new regulatory process that we have to go through a new Office of Regulatory Management, which makes our process of modifying regulations a little bit more difficult, takes more time. We're also under a new mandate. Governor Youngkin he said he wants to reduce the regulatory burden by 25%. So we have to take our existing regulations and reduce them 25%. Anytime we want to add something to that, that's increasing the burden to it. So we have to look long and hard at what we're gonna add to a regulation versus taking out. So, you know, it's not an excuse for not doing it, but in the same regard, we're being watched, if we go in and we want to add new things to the regulation, it's coming under a lot more scrutiny why we're doing it.
Well, here's my position on this. I'll be 73 June the 3rd. I'm running out of days. You know what I mean?
I hope not, Pete.
Days.
But, it is, we had a really good conversation with that about the transfers and agents. I think we were kind of split on it. It wasn't, but we did have a good conversation. We'd like to continue looking at that. But right now, with what we're having to go through with this new office,
Listen, I understand that completely, but this other issue with this call box.
We'll look into that.
That's a daily thing.
We will look into
I'm
that.
gonna ride around looking over my back all day long.
And I think I heard someone say the letter of the law versus the intent of the law. And we will get with law enforcement and find out, hopefully we won't have to change the regulation. We can just, talk to law enforcement and find out what's being done and how it's being done. But, we can look into that and get back to you in August when we come back in August.
That's what it used to say. It used to say 3 containers,
Yeah,
and that's gone. And I don't know where it went.
yeah. I think that was before my time and before all of our time, so.
Well,
yeah.
that's part of the problem.
Yeah, back in the late 80s. Damn.
All right, are we done?
I was just gonna say, I will remind the committee when I send the email to make the agenda, if there's things you want to put on it, if there's things you want to discuss, let us know as soon as possible, because then staff can do the groundwork to have data available for the committee to discuss. Other than that, next item would be public comment.
All right. Public comment, come on up, sir.
Oh,
All right.
Please state your name when you get there.
I'm Jacob Jewell from Reedville, Virginia, Crabber. I just think if we're going to come back here every year and discuss the bushel limits and the winter crab survey, and if they're going to be tampered with every year, that y'all and the committee should sit down and create those thresholds or target numbers that warrant a cut. Y'all are messing with a lot of people's livelihood, cutting us down from the original limit, possibly as a precautionary measure, as you said before. The crabs are right back this year, whether we needed it, probably not, but now you call it an increase, but in my mind, it's still a decrease, going to that little bit larger, grand scheme of things, that's still a decrease, even though we, spiked up 46%. I think that y'all should sit down and really give, those target numbers that we're looking for in order to warrant an action. Because it was the way it was presented last year, just this meeting, I got up here and said the same thing, that y'all are giving us a lot of information, but it's not really exactly what I want to see. I want to see, by your numbers, if you cut us back by this much, how are we going to look next year? How, by cutting us back our limits, what do you predict our threshold should be? And I didn't see that last year. I don't see that again, but,
Let me respond to that. That's a real good point. It's, the CBSAC committee, one of the things we like to do with that, it would be nice that if we reach a certain point, a trigger, some management action is going to take place. But we need to know what that management action is going to be. We could set those triggers pretty easily. We can set however we want to do it by percentile. But I will tell you, sitting in a room dealing with groups like this, and Maryland doing it too, trying to decide what that action's going to be is very difficult. It would be a great process where it's like, if we drop 25%, we're going to reduce bushel limits some percentage, or we're going to do something. But the problem is getting everybody to agree to that in advance for something that hasn't happened yet. But it's a good idea. I agree with that. I think it's a real good idea to have that. So you all can plan where if all of a sudden the dredge survey or the survey results come out and we're seeing an increase or decrease, you can look at the management and say, well, this is what's going to occur. We know what's going to occur, instead of coming to a meeting like this and making the decision. A lot of work goes into these decisions, but you're hearing it for the first time. But I think that's a good idea.
I'd like to also, maybe next year, when y'all present this, have the outlook. What, by you, I guess in y'all's terms, giving us back more limits, how do you see that affecting the harvest rate?
That's kind of hard to do because of all the other conditions, like, pricing, a lot of things can occur. So a lot of us, we're very, forecasting for the future is really hard. And it's like, the last thing we want to do is come up with a forecast where we're saying, this is going to be the landings next year. And because of storms, weather, prices, we're nowhere near that. And then everyone's going to go, you told me it was going to be a great year.
Right, no, my,
So we're
I
very-
guess, comment would be, everything y'all are doing, I believe, is predicting trends or trying to get the trend. So maybe y'all could, no, don't say it's gonna increase 21%, but you could say, we're gonna see a X increase, just like your graphs do. If we're basing, my livelihood off that graph, maybe we could present it to us a
We
little
can
bit better.
try, but we're not going to be in the business of making a forecast, I'll tell you that.
So, along those lines, I think, why maybe we could reduce some of the yield versus fish mortality or exploitation rate curves that we use to figure out about where we should be in terms of the fraction that we take out. To do that, it's gonna, might be a little complicated, but no, that just showing the yield curves, I think might be useful to see.
For anyone else from the audience, come forward. You state your name and where you're from.
Monica Sheneman, and I'm from Plattsburgh, Virginia. And I'm so glad you said that because I had that same thing written down. So I definitely concur with everything that was just said. I just really I want you guys to take notice of the people that took time after working today, just like you guys, to be here. There's a lot of guys out here and women out here. I think I'm a little bit disappointed in how today went. I mean, I know an increase is better than no increase at all, but I was kind of looking forward to a little bit more discussion on limits instead of saying, okay, this is staff recommendation, we're gonna go ahead and agree with it without doing, well, maybe we can do something else. And I assume because some increase is better than no increase, but I just really wanted to make a statement of, I concur with everything that was just said. I think it's important to take notice of people that are concerned and wanted to be here today, because it's really important. And I know you know that, but I just wanted to make sure I put that on the record.
No, thank you, I appreciate that.
Let me respond to that real quick. To let you all know, this is an advisory committee. So they make it, they'll make it, recommendations, and then we go before our commission. And that, the meeting will be the 27th, June 27th. And that's our public hearing. And so you'll have the opportunity to do written comment if you want. You can send an email. If you want to attend that meeting, you can, but those meetings are during the day. But we will have a public comment that day where we will present what our recommendations are. We'll say what CMAC has said as well. And we also provide any comments that we get from people, pros and cons. And then everybody who wants to will have the opportunity to come up and speak accordingly. Whatever we put forward as a measure, we can make it vague or we can make it very detailed. The commission can do less, but they can't do more, okay? So if, for instance, we said we were gonna increase, reduce 10%. Well, they can't go and say, we're gonna reduce 20. They can go with 8, but they can't go above that 10, as an example. So there are gonna be at least one more opportunity, and like I said, look at our website, you can see, we welcome letters, you can watch the meeting live if you can't come, you can, watch it on your phone even and listen to it. So there's gonna be one more opportunity to voice your concern and your interest in everything else. So, and I encourage you all to do that, and it's great to see this many people out, because a lot of our meetings, we don't have a whole lot of people in the audience. So I thank everybody for coming in that regard.
Anyone else come on up, sir.
Emery Rice, Reedville, Virginia. Kind of want to go along first on the lines of what Monica said about, kind of just going with staff recommendation and being a little disappointed. I was kind of hoping you guys would, I'm not going to say fight them a little bit, but maybe come out with an alternate idea than exactly what they said. And I also want to talk one thing about the Winter Drudge Survey publications. Starting in 2018, once the CBSAC goes through them, they do an executive survey on the front page. And I'm pretty certain that with the numbers they've shown, it'll probably say the same thing this year. Every one of them has said, word for word, overfishing is not occurring and the population is not depleted, and there are no substantial management changes necessary. Yet last year, by the numbers we took, that was a substantial management change. And I do not agree with how it was put down, and it was done, against what the Winter Drudge Survey, executive survey, and it was written 3 or 4 times throughout the entire survey publication. You can go through and read it. It was a little overstep, in my opinion.
Thank you for that. Pat, you want to respond to that?
Everyone's entitled to their opinion.
Sure. No, I think the part you mentioned about when we say that there's no overfishing, and what
We're not overfishing, okay? The thing is, we do not want to get to the point. The last time we were in a situation, we waited and waited and waited until the population crashed and had to put in a federal fishery disaster to do something about it. And that's why we do what's called a precautionary approach. Is management absolutely necessary? Maybe yes, maybe no. That's why it's called precautionary. It's try to help what we can. So yes, it wasn't overfished, and overfishing wasn't occurring. The exploitation rates were getting, higher than what we wanted. So a bunch of scientists that are smarter than me were ones who said, 2 years ago, I'm the chairman of the CMAC committee. 2 years ago, we saw those low juvenile numbers, and I said, guys, are we going to do anything? And they said, we manage on the female spawning stock, and the female spawning stock is fine. Rom being one of them. So we did nothing. Last year, we saw the decline in females, and we saw a decline in males, some of the lowest levels overall, and everybody was in agreement saying, we need to do something. We need to do some kind of precautionary approach. So that's why we did what we did. Because instead of waiting until things get too bad, take some, it's better to do small steps and try to prevent any further decline in the population.
And when we talk about,
To that crash.
Say again?
What year is that crash you were talking about? Do you have a general idea?
It was the early 2000s.
All right, that's what it-
about 1998 to 2008 was the low period.
All right, I can come up if I need to. I'm Eddie McAllister, I'm from
Can I actually
Warsaw.
just finish
All right,
responding
finish
to
it up. I
him?
got something.
Sorry.
I got something.
I did want to mention that when we talk about taking serious management reductions, in 2008, we took 34% reduction. Last year, the cuts we took, we estimate to be about a 4% reduction. So we looked at how many people are achieving their bushel limits and what that would mean if we reduced here and here within these dates. We gave the advisory committee a few options within like a 4 to 7% reduction range, and the 4% was what went through. So that is what we put into effect. We didn't want to do anything drastic that would have been, anywhere near that 2008. So when we don't want to, when the CMAC doesn't recommend, serious management changes, that's not what we're doing here.
You don't call losing a good portion of our limits for an extra, month and a half in the spring and 2 months during the fall, substantial?
Based on how many people actually achieved their bushel limits, it would have been only a 4% reduction for Virginia.
All right, Mr. McAllister.
Somehow, I don't know how I stumbled on this, but I found a bulletin that BMRC put out.
State your name and
It's
where
Eddie
you're from.
McAllister, Warsaw, Virginia. And I was looking at the current limits. And in 2014, I found this thing the other day. It said from March 17th, 2014 through November the 30th, 2014, any harvester legally licensed for a crab pot license limited to the following harvest and possession limits shown below. All right, for your 85 pot license, it was 16 bushels. For 127 pot crab pot license, 21 bushels. 170 pot, 27 bushels. If you're ready for this, 255, your limit was 43 bushels, and for 425, you were at 55 bushels. That was 9 years ago, give or take. Now, look at where we are now. I mean, you're talking 50% at our 21 bushel limit in the spring and fall. So I don't know how much more you can take. I really don't. I mean, you keep, because I saw your little graph, and on 2014, the drought survey was low. 2014, it was one of the lowest there was, and this is the limit we still had. So I'm not saying you didn't need to do an adjustment, but that's drastic. You know, that's a real drastic change.
Anyone else from the public? Ron?
Mike, just regarding the question about why last year, what happened is that in 2017, so in 2017, female runs about 250 million. And over the following, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years through 2022, it dropped to about 90 million, 90 plus million. So it had dropped, and it was getting really close to the threshold. And that's why there was some management action implemented. It wasn't because of the juveniles, it was because that spawning stock had basically been ratcheting down, and so we were concerned. And so now that it's back up, you know, now there isn't the need to do that, but we don't want to risk that it'll go right back to near the threshold where it gets severe management action. And in 2014, we were below the threshold in abundance, and that was pretty serious.
All right, I see the commissioner back there. Do you have anything you want to?
You're calling me right out, aren't you? I was actually an innocent bystander. Since you're calling me up, I'm gonna keep all the data points to myself. I'm not gonna get into the science today, okay? I'm gonna leave it alone. I just wanna say thank you guys for coming. This is awesome, seeing as many people in a room exercising their rights as citizens in a Commonwealth, and having VIMs and representatives from the higher education institutions is amazing. I also wanted to state, thank you guys. I see Pete Nixon up there. I've known Pete Nixon for a very long time, and he was talking about how many more days he has left. All the people that I used to sail with that he knew are gone now, and we see it. And you're absolutely right about the 3 containers. That was there. The 3 containers was there. I get a lot of, well, I can't find it in regulation anymore. I don't know where it was, but it definitely was there, and you're 100% right on that. Officer Miller's been here for almost 30 years, whatever it is, but he remembers it too. And it went away sometime in the 90s. We just don't know. We don't remember when. We're getting old too, Pete. We're getting old too. But I want to thank you guys for everything you're doing. I really do appreciate it. I agree with the gentleman that came up here earlier about what are the benchmarks to where we decide to put more constrictive measures in, and when do we loosen up some of the ones we put in place? You know, what does the juvenile number look like? What does the female number look like? And what does the male number look like? We do need to have a plan, guys. I tasked that committee with the plan. We need a plan to where if we exceed this amount, if the survey comes back 2 or 3 years in a row, we will go back to normal bushel limits, we'll extend the seasons or something like that. Or if the numbers come in for this many years, we're just not gonna change anything or whatever we gotta do. We're not interested here in this administration to putting burdens on you and figuring out that they're permanent. You know, I've been doing this a very long time, as long as anybody in this room, except probably Pete, a few others, Mr. George. I know I looked young, but it's okay, I started very young. So, I remember the Diggs boys when all of them were still here, and it was some time. But I'll tell you, we've seen all the changes go on, and we have to keep our eye on the ball here and make sure that we don't get too crazy and open it up to where we do, you know, so much damage that the stocks can't rebound. But at the same time, we do got to understand that we have to regulate this fishery in a manner that is conducive with both management, the ecosystem, and with you guys as well. So I really would like to task you guys with coming up with ideas to be able to have a management plan to what it looks like if we get to where we need to be. And how do we get there? I know some of it's not easy to predict, but as Pat said, this critter is something. I remember the days crabbing when there was no season and we had the snow. You just well took them up for a while. There was no need to fish. One flake hits the water, you just well quit for several weeks. So I get it. So I do understand that very much so. And Pat is also right. There's a new process on the regulatory portion of this of how we do it. And the administration is looking to reduce the regulatory burden on the constituents that we cover. So we need to make sure we look at that too as well without putting measures in place or taking things out that affect the ecosystem to the point to which we can't rebound or negatively constantly keep going in the downward direction. What that looks like, I don't know. I'm gonna leave that to y'all. I'm tasking that with y'all. But thank you guys for your service. And Mr. Chairman, I appreciate that. I'm hoping I'm not getting a license sanction or anything today. I hope everything's good, but I appreciate you. Thank you guys.
Thank you, Commissioner Green. All right, and again, it is certainly beneficial to the industry and to us as a committee to hear from the public, so we thank you all for coming out. Is there any further business for the committee?
Just for the committee, housekeeping, we do have pens if you want to fill out your reapplication to the committee. Otherwise, I can give you an envelope to send it in a little later. And if you need mileage reimbursement forms, we've got paper forms, or I can email it to you if you just want to send that back.
Thank you, Alexa. Appreciate it. All right. Do we need to have a motion for adjournment? Second motion and a second. All in favor? Thank you.
Yeah, no, people spoke last year and we heard them loud and clear. I said,